Hello, my friends. Welcome to the latest edition of Here's What We Know, the podcast of unexpected conversations. And I love shows like this. You know why? I walk away smarter. Now, many of you will say, well, that's a low bar. And you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But this guy, I want to introduce you to my goodness, the title is like 19 words long, but I'm going to
Too
try
short.
the Chief Coaching Officer and Leadership Development Practice Guru. Where I'm from, we call him the head knocker. His name is Dr. Dan Docherty. And how are you, Dan?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad we already shrunk the title down, so that's a good way to start for everybody listening to us. So I'm excited to be here.
You've earned that title. And listen, you had to be a Dr. Dan Docherty. My father-in-law is a PhD. But as I told him, Steve Henderson sounds better with PhD behind it. You sound better. I mean, the alliteration alone, Dr. Dan Docherty. It's like you didn't even have an option, dude.
I just need to travel with you, Gary. That's like if I could travel with you, and then maybe that would make me not only connect with people more, but they'd be like, that sounds great. That's never sounded that way coming out of my mouth. So, and actually what's funny is we go into this, it doesn't really mean anything. What matters more about kind of why it's kind of sitting there, and I guess we'll talk about that as we go.
No, it does mean something because it means you put the work in. That's what it means. That is the title to say, listen, when I talk about this subject, I'm not just doing like Gary does and make it up off the top of his head. I've actually studied it. I know it. I've made this a big, not the purpose in my life. I've made it a purpose in my life that to know this and to go from it. So yeah, I could do intros. I can do intros. I'd be happy to, your next speaking engagement, I'll come in and I'll get the crowd revved up. Don't you worry.
That sounds good.
No, I won't really. I'm too damn lazy, Dan. Listen, when I was going through your history, you're another one of those Ohio boys. I met you through Jeff Bloomfield, who's been on this podcast. I've been on his. And Jeff told you maybe the story of how we met. I saw him speaking somewhere at a company event, and they had lunch, and I didn't know anybody at the company event. I knew the guy who had invited me, but he was one of the big wigs in the company, and he was meeting with all the people in his team. It was like an honor to go sit with him. And I get it. I see the guy all the time. It's not that big of an honor. But I was sitting there eating my lunch by myself when all of a sudden Jeff sits down and goes, "Hey, I'm Jeff. Tell me your story," basically. Which was awesome. And I love the approach. I want to hear how you got there. But what I'm really concerned about is you got there from Ohio. And you've mentioned this in a couple of your stories, but you've never said how. You talk about your high school music teacher. I'm an old band geek, Dan. I'm an old band geek.
Yeah.
Tell me the story behind that.
Behind the music part with Mr. Richardson.
Mr. Richardson. I didn't even know his name. So tell me about Mr. Richardson.
Yeah, I will. It's interesting when you go back. One of the things I love about the stuff that we do, Jeff's an amazing person. I joined Jeff like 7 years ago, and we have this passion for communication and driving impact for people. If anybody's listening to this, I hope that they kind of walk away saying, there's probably, I don't think, and you've been in this profession, any bigger gift that I believe you can give human beings on this planet than the ability to communicate with impact. And I think with all the way the world is moving, sometimes we forget that that's still a really important skill. And so when I met Jeff along the way, everything that Jeff was doing, I'll go right back to Mr. Richardson, but everything Jeff was doing, Jeff was looking at that originally through like a sales performance lens, helping really salespeople more authentically connect and have impact with the people that they serve in that capacity. And I was kind of going down, Gary, the same path, really more from the leadership development space. And so, when we kind of collided together, I often share about the fact it was one of those weird things. We were sitting across the table from each other, similar to what you were doing at lunch. But I was invited to a meeting. Jeff happened to be there. And the reality is that we all of a sudden were like, wow, we both had worship leading in common. We both had planted churches. We both came out of life sciences. We both had adopted children. We kind of had even the same order of our children, girl, boy, girl, and all this stuff in common. And he's like, wow, what you're doing in leadership, I've been really working in sales performance, but he actually started in executive kind of leadership. So I only tell people that because when you go all the way back on my origin story, Mr. Richardson was kind of, and I was blessed, Gary, with great parents and we had our ups and downs as a family and all that. But, at the end of the day, I was very fortunate to grow in a family. My dad was a tool and die apprentice. blue collar, worked his way up, no college education and all that. And my dad worked a ton, but growing up in Northern Ohio it was a thing for us back in those days, that sports were sports, and I wasn't actually a great athlete. And so I was kind of like, John Travolta in Grease. I think I tried every sport along the way. And then I realized not good at that, not good at that. Don't look great in a wrestling singlet. So that's not going to work. And it just kind of kept going on. But then, when I kind of went through that journey, I realized, and I somehow, and I'm a faith-based person, so through that, I meet this music teacher, and he saw something in me I never saw in myself, honestly. And when I met him, I remember the show choir at the time was visiting our junior high. And I usually tell this part of the story. And I kind of was watching, and I'm like, what is that? And I really wasn't exposed to theater or music or any of that at that time. And I'm like, that looks fun. And when you kind of catch something like that looks fun, but you don't really know what that means. As I went into ninth grade and got into high school, I saw this show choir performing. I'm like, I think I want to do that, And Mr. Richardson was the director. We called him Mr. R or ER. And the thing is that he, when I remember when I first auditioned, and this is a part of the story I never tell, that when we went in an audition, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I didn't even know if I could sing, but he saw something kind of in me that was this, kind of pulled out this dreamer performer a little bit in me. And I was like, wow. And I'll never forget the way it worked in our high school was you do the audition and then you don't hear anything. And then the people that are in the show choir at that time, now I hope nobody's turned off because I went from sports to show choir, but stick with us anyway. Please don't hang up don't stop listening, hang up. Don't stop listening to us.
I've had everybody out. If you listen to the show, you've heard musicians, you've heard athletes, everybody's
Good.
on the story.
Good. So don't stop listening. But it was one of those moments where what the people in the group would do is they'd come to your house. I don't remember exactly the time, but it was dark, 6:00 in the morning. They'd wake you up and you had that moment like you're in the group, and I had that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in this group. And, and that kind of led on through, what I did through high school, both in, show choir and musical theater, those sorts of things. And, and the reason that's so important to me is, I've always, when it comes to like communication, and I didn't know back then that if I was a strength certified coach back when I was 19, it probably would have been pretty helpful to know that communication is like one of my top 5 talents. And that when you invest in that, it becomes a skill. I didn't realize that, Gary. I just was able to kind of see that come to life through music. And as I went through my life, Mr. Richardson is really the only teacher in my life. And I never even thought I'd be a teacher because in my life today, I consult and work with Jeff. And then I'm also a leadership professor at Miami University in Ohio, and never, ever thought I was a teacher, man, but he's the only teacher I ever wrote a letter to. And, you're a musician, so it was, we created a demo CD back in the day of our worship band, and probably wasn't any good, but I remember writing him that letter. You talk about the why, and sending it to him, saying, I just want you to know, long after my buddies aren't doing sports anymore, I'm still singing. So, and that kind of led a little bit into my family. And my daughter, literally as we speak, my wife and I are flying tomorrow. My daughter is in an original musical called Labelless, written by Drew and Leah Lachey, off Broadway. So we're going to see her in that show this weekend in New York City. So, it's amazing how those things kind of run downhill, when you're exposed and people kind of pull out the dreamer in you. And that's just one of my things. So, but if he wasn't that foundational, and I'll close the part of your question with this, about a year and a half ago, I was driving to Cleveland for a keynote, and I was working with a hospital system up in Northern Ohio that's affiliated with university hospitals. And you ever get one of those moments where you're like, I don't even know if I can find Mr. Richardson's number, and I, modern technology, found a number and text him, not even really knowing it was him, saying, hey, I'm, going to be speaking at this event, and I just want you to know that still kind of moved, past some things forward that I learned from you and others like my parents and others in my journey. And I get a response back, Gary, like in a minute. And he's like, yeah, I follow you on LinkedIn, and I'm so proud of the things that you're doing and making an impact on communication and leadership and all that. He's like, but I just had colon surgery. I hadn't seen him now, mind you, in like 30 years. He's like, I just had colon surgery and I'm in a lot of pain, so I can't come. So I'm up keynoting, answering a question similar to what you posed about Mr. Richardson. I'm telling a little bit of his story. About 7 minutes in, I'm room about 80 liters, and all of a sudden the door in the back opens and in he walks. And it was one of those moments where, like, all
You
my
make me cry.
emotions
Don't
went,
you
like,
make me
right up
cry.
into my throat, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I said, "Do you remember that guy that I was just talking about? He's right there." And you think about it, and I'll end with this with him. If you think about it, in leadership, one of the things I love, whether we're working with undergraduate students, professionals in a Fortune 5 company, or working, teaching at the MBA level in leadership, I it sounds so intuitive that, we never get there alone, but man, we're so wired for self-preservation. How cool is it when we can continue to open up each other's eyes to the fact that, man, who are those people that impacted your journey? And then you think about them, you write about them, and then if you're bold enough, you reach out to them and say, "I just want you to know that of all the people in the world, you made my list." And that was all thread through communication. Honestly, I was never a professional performer, never going to be that, but the reality was that wasn't even my dream, but communication was. And that's, so thanks for asking about him. But, he's just one of the many people in my journey that I've been blessed to have around me, but he's pretty important. So I hope anybody listening to us is like, man, if there's one person that you're thinking about like right now, I hope from the both of us, you're like, man, go write down that person's name, text them, call them, find them if they're still alive, and just let them know. The most rich and amazing conversations happen.
Well, amen. And most of us, if you can boil it down to one, some of us have two, three, four, and some of us didn't have the communication, not only skills but awareness. That's the whole thing. I would be willing to just give my thumbnail thing is what Mr. Richardson saw in you. Listen, talent is undeniable. That's easy. You watch Michael Jordan play basketball. There you go. What you can't see is desire.
Mm.
And some people are blessed with that they can sit back and look at someone and go, it's the desire. I can work with the desire. And if you have that, because you're going to push you, I won't have to push you. I just need to encourage you.
Mm.
And to have that kind of thing. I, I get called Mr. Pollyanna and stuff. Somebody, I was playing golf with him one day, and he's like, "You're like the Tony Robbins of golf. You're always," and I'm like, because I think that's where all of our joy is.
Mm.
And if I can encourage you, and you're younger than me, but I've been on the other side of that. I was at work one day, and I get this email. And I get this email from this guy who goes, "I know you don't remember me, but I came into your radio station when I was in high school, and I watched what you did, and I listened to you, and it changed my life. I've literally spent the last many decades doing radio, doing this, doing that, and all that. And I now I do voiceover work, and I'm the voice of this and this and this and this." And he goes, "But it always started with you. And I just wanted to reach out and tell you that."
Mm.
And it was like, oh my gosh, that every now and then we all feel like we're running into brick walls. But every now and then, and I'm a man of faith too, God touches you on the shoulder and goes, this is what you do. This is one of the reasons you're here. Not the reason, but this is one of the reasons you're here. And to have that, and that's what I look forward to our conversation today. My son, I have teenagers. I have a 15 and a 13-year-old. And my son last night, he was asking me, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "Oh, I'm talking to this neuroscientist. It's really cool." He goes, What's he going to talk about?" And I had to sum it up to my son, who's, 15 years old. They got that much attention span. And then they just get whatever if you try to go into the details. And here's how I summed it up. I said, "Babe, I think he works on trying to teach us all how to use our brains better."
Mm.
And he goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And usually he just glosses over. And he goes, "Tell me how it goes." And I'm like, "Dan, that's a huge compliment to you, son."
Thank you.
Is
Thank
that
you.
right?
Well, yeah. Well, what's interesting is, and I always want to make sure if anybody listening out there is a bench neuroscientist, I always want to be perfectly clear with people. I am not a bench neuroscientist. There's a big difference. But my discipline coming out of the life sciences industry, and then in my doctoral program, really looking into how does neuroscience combine with leadership and communication. It's more about applied neuroscience for me. So I just want to separate that because it is a big difference to people
That
that
is
do
a very good
bench
point.
work.
And we
But I
got
will
all the
say,
theory in the world. You show practicality.
well, that's the key, Gary. I mean, really the key for me is like, whenever we're having fortunate enough to work with people, and one of the things that you were just describing too, and it's kind of a tenet of ours, is that I hope people pick this up, is that every moment we have, this moment right now, is a situational moment of impact. Everyone. And they generate from both trust and truth. And as simple as a concept as that sounds, in the business of communication and relationships, neuroscience only sets a little bit of a foundation of we've got some wiring that we in this modern world continue to figure out more and more. But the reality is it goes all the way back. I always laugh when people talk about emotional intelligence. Aristotle was talking about our ability to control anger way back in the day. So none of it's new. What is new, though, is that the understanding of how that informs how we build relationships, how people make decisions, how they problem solve, how they communicate is really the part now. Like, can we take some of that? The best coaches, the best performers, the best leaders, they've known it over time, but we have more information now and we're learning more and more every day, that some of those great bench scientists are doing that helps inform like, well, how does that impact in how Dan and Gary build a relationship? And just think about if we had a world where we said, you know what, this moment is a moment of impact. We acknowledge that. And we said, we're going to build it through the foundation of trust. And guess what? We're going to trust each other so much that we're going to deliver the truth to each other because that's what you deserve. It would save a lot of problems, and it would help regulate emotion. And so for me, part of my passion on neuroscience is it's only sets up for people a little bit of an understanding about why those things help inform how we build relationship with people. Because people ask me all the time, well, like, well, what's your why? And when I'm working, in our leadership center at the university, we're really blessed, Gary, to work with almost 70. My colleague Megan Gerhardt and I work with 70 students every year. They come through our leadership center. They're 18 to 21 years old, 22 years old. And they all walk out of our center. They know their strengths. They're trained on emotional intelligence by the time they're 20, not 40. They know their why. They state their why, through a Leading on Purpose weekend we have. And whether Jeff and I are doing it in the corporate setting or in the university setting is quite irrelevant, actually. But people always ask me, like, well, what's your why? And it's so simple for me. If we can, and think about this as a communicator, if we can coach with purpose and impact so that higher quality relationships are built, I'm convinced that if we can lean into that, whatever your definition of performance is, that will happen. And so I love the ability to coach. We can maybe get into this in a minute or two, but the only reason I went down this journey was not because was at the mountaintop of my journey, but actually I was in the valley, and I think that's one of the most fascinating things in life. All the amazing people you've had a chance to talk to and interview, when you get in their story, that a lot of their learnings come from pain, and come from the valley. And I wouldn't be here talking to you. And I feel honored to be here, just so you know, but I wouldn't be here talking to you if I didn't have that moment in the valley where I was having chest pains and all that good stuff. And I hope that people know that when we stay on these cycles where we don't build strong relationships in Western culture, it is killing us. And I can tell you the science behind that, but the reality is it is killing us. We're not as innovative. We're not as creative. We're not as strong at building relationships. We're not as flexible. We're not as adaptable, all those things. And we got to know that stuff really matters, And so part of our mission is letting people know that matters. That meant you can't stay on the treadmill or the hamster wheel forever. You just can't do it, man. It catches you and it catches us.
I think it's a brilliant answer, and I love going down all these things, and even when you say coaching, no matter what you do, we're coaching. You're a parent, you're a coach,
Right.
right? You're a partner in a marriage, you're a coach, and having to approach it. And my thing is, you were saying trying to deal with the anger, and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know if there's such a thing as anger. I think there are different facets of fear. Right?
Interesting. Yep.
I mean, that think about it in the Bible. How many times when an angel appears, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because I know you humans. First thing you do is you get afraid,
Yeah.
right? Even Adam, when he told the first lie, why? Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And I've said before, I think I something happened one time with my sons when they were younger, and it was a desk that fell over because it was propped up stupidly by me. And I ran out and I started yelling at them. And my wife, who was outside, she came in and she goes, "What happened?" She goes, "I can hear you out in the thing." And I made that conscious decision. I will never yell at you again. And I had to tell my boys, "I'm so sorry. I wasn't angry. I was so afraid. You are literally the most valuable things I will ever have in my life. And I thought something I had done had put you in fear, put you in danger. And my fear, as most people do, comes out as anger. I get angry because I don't think you understand what I'm saying. You're wrong about this political opinion, and I'm afraid you're going to continue down that path." It's finding a way to deal with that. And I love the way you and Jeff and the way you guys approach it. Is I love the empathy angle. I love how you if it how are and you got the 6 P's, right? And we'll go
Mhm.
through that because I find alliteration, Dr. Dan Docherty, a very wonderful thing. And how it goes past that. But these are things that when you talk about it, this is stuff we all do. Whether you're leading a company or whether you're not, this is something that everybody is going to have to deal with one way or the other. Whether you deal with it or you don't deal with it, it's still going to be a part of your destiny.
Yeah, and Gary, it's interesting because when I was finishing my dissertation defense, and we talked a little bit about this, but that's, I was when I went through that journey, I wasn't like this 23-year-old going back to get a doctorate degree. I was 47 when I went back to school, and that was really all out of the fact that I was curious enough about what you just called coaching is, and you're right, and it goes across so many different facets. When you're guiding someone from helping them through shared vision and conversations to move from where they are to where they want to go, that guiding principle and helping them flourish in that endeavor is really the art of amazing coaching. And the best coaches in the world, regardless of where they come from, whatever you put under the umbrella of coaching, they figure that out. You don't need leadership theory to tell you that, although it's out there, that we have to form unique, independent relationships with every one of our players, whoever's, and I mean players, like if you are a sports coach, that makes sense. If you're a parent, those are your children and your significant other. If you're in the business world, it's your team of direct reports, any one of those. And that's really interesting concept, unique, independent relationships with everybody that walks in your lane. And which is why modern management span of control actually is a real thing, because you can't manage a million people and get that done. But I remember leaving my doctoral program, and I was having a conversation with my chair, and I said, sitting here as a 50-year-old, a lot of this is, it's common sense. And, he looked at me like a golden retriever that kind of cocks his head, and he's like, hmm. He's like, well, why are you here? Why'd you do this for that past 4.5 years if it's so common sense? I was like, okay, fair enough. Got you. And then he went on to say, just remember, if you're ever fortunate enough to be on a podcast, be training people, doing whatever, keynoting, know that what's common sense isn't common practice. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it. And so, that kind of led down this path of really kind of chasing impact and not chasing other things. And maybe, and as when you get into certain seasons of life, we're wired at that moment in our life and we see things through different lenses. But what I love in like communication through intergenerations is we all desire connection. That's never going away. COVID taught us that socialization is real, and so one of those P's you talked about that is so important for us is perspective. And somebody on listening to us be like, well, perspectives, that's important in relationships. Well, of course it is. But think about it. How often can we, especially when we're under stress, fear, whatever it might be, fear might trigger an emotion. But when that happens, man, can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? You had mentioned a couple, I'll make this really short because it could be like another 2 hours, but when I'm keynoting on,
You go ahead.
when I'm I don't think your people listening would hit say, please be quiet.
I lose interest after an hour. So you be
Perfect.
talking on your own.
Perfect. So I'll make it quick. But when I'm keynoting on our second book, which is my second book, which is going to be coming out later this year, it's called The Dream Leader. And that piece, and when I keynote on dreams, one of the people that I go back to, I say, can you imagine for a second? And this goes back to kind of some of the figures you're talking about, in the Bible. I was like, I said, if I could tell you that there was a young man who started off with all the brashness in the world, kind of daddy's favorite, brothers kind of turned on him, went through these peaks and valleys, but yet through all of that, as he grew, as he gained wisdom, as he matured, and then he moved to the second in command of a major global superpower, of which they ran a country arguably for almost 80 years. Would you have any interest in understanding his story? And everybody's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, I ain't talking about Steve Jobs. I'm not talking about blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about Elon Musk. I'm talking about Joseph. And those years, and I've been fortunate in regional and community theater to play him and wear his coat. And I've always had like this amazing kind of awe of him because, what I love to tell leaders is like, you can be a dreamer. Question I have for you is, are you a dream interpreter? Because in coaching, with your ability to interpret dreams and vision, as Jeff and I call it shared vision, as people are going through their journey, that reestablishes like what a dream is. If it's like, I want to help you fulfill a future aspiration of a desired state, I'm all in, man. I'm all in. Understanding your skills and your strengths and your talents and all that good stuff. But that's like the amazing part of that story, because you mentioned the 6 Ps. Well, his are like the 4 Ps. How do you respond if you get thrown in a pit? How do you respond if all of a sudden you're sitting in front of Potiphar and you're all of a sudden rising to some level of authority again, then you get accused of something that you never did and you find yourself in prison, P number 3. And then all of a sudden you're sitting at the right arm of the Pharaoh, and all of a sudden your brothers walk back into a situation where you can and you got all the armor on, just like in leadership, you carry all the power and they don't recognize you and you look down at them metaphorically, maybe really, and you have a choice: forgive or take retribution. Now you get into psychological safety in the modern terms, right? What did he do? He forgave. And it's like, in that story is like,
with him a little bit. Let's be honest. He had to screw with him a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, he messed with Benjamin. He messed with Benjamin.
They sold him into slavery.
Yeah.
He gets to have a little.
I'm going to pick on the little one. I'm going to pick on the youngest brother, or not really, but I'm going to go after Benjamin, right? But that story to me, and I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it really is like, I think in leadership and in coaching, one of the things that I love is that I really believe that dreams are the new vulnerability. I really do. This country, think about this for a second. This is in our second book, but think about this. When you ask somebody, hey, how you doing? And they give you a sarcastic response, in this country, what do they say?
I'm still alive.
Yeah. And they'll take the live and they'll go, living the dream.
Yeah.
And I'm always like,
right side of the dirt.
Yeah, I'm like, you don't mean it. But really our country was built on that. And think about our current culture and environment, how much angst and tension there is, and then the reality is that just that 1 P to perspective, the other 4 Ps, doesn't really matter what source or leader you follow. They just know that there is an art to building a relationship. And I'm convinced more than ever, not because I'm getting older, but that in my humble view is such a skill that we equip others with. And man, what a difference it would make in this world. Chick-fil-A figured it out. No matter what you think of their chicken, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But at billions and billions of dollars later, they get young people to kind of lean in, and they have a certain level of service, and their values are their values. You don't like their values, they don't care. Don't buy their chicken. But the reality is they stay true to it. And I just think there's such a magic to values.
They will not turn service away from you if they don't agree with you.
No.
Right? I mean,
right.
You can buy the chicken. You use it for whatever you want. Buy the chicken.
Right.
We don't care. I love the story of Joseph. And if you're not familiar of it, just go read it in the Bible. Even if you're not religious, just go read it, because talk about figuring it out figuring out your why. And that was going to be one of my questions, because that's an easy thing to say. It is. Why? Why do you want to? Um, it is possibly the hardest question you will ever answer, you know, and you can, and that go, because there's so many. Why do you think the way you do? Why do you believe that? Why are you here? Um, and it's, I've known in my own journey, figuring out what I do. I always tell this story. I was sitting in a room with Kenny Chesney, right? It's where Kenny Chesney was Kenny Chesney. He was just a guy who came out. He walked into the station, was sitting in with us in an office, and he was talking about, I just got to figure out how to get to that next level. And I looked at him and sarcastically said, dude, if I knew the answer, I'd be sitting on my own private island talking to a bigger star than you. But he did.
Yeah.
He figured out his why.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral of that story is it had nothing to do with me. But if finding that and trying to help someone, I had this conversation with my son last night. He's a freshman in high school. He's playing sports, and he made some teams, didn't make the others. And I asked him, what is it you're trying to get out of sports? What is it you want to do? Is it just fun? Are you go? And I said, there's no wrong answer. And I've got no expectations. I just think sometimes it's important to say things out loud, because it bounces around in our head and it makes really good sense until you say it out loud. So I do my best to say things out loud. And then if it sounds better when you said out loud, then we're on to something. And sometimes you're in the process of saying it and you go, okay, that's stupid. That's right there. Just knock it off. How do you get to the whys? How do you, because I can't imagine there's anything bigger that you do. Is there, I mean, in your professional life and maybe even your personal life, with your faith, with your family, how do you get there? How do you address that?
Let's talk about the inevitable. End of life. Once I leave this earth, I can't do anything for my loved ones, but I've just learned by pre-planning a funeral or cemetery in advance takes the guesswork out when death occurs suddenly and your mind is clouded with grief. Dignity Memorial can help. My friend Tina Skurla pre-plans funeral and cemetery arrangements so loved ones don't have to. They're North America's largest provider of funeral, cremation, and cemetery services. They're dedicated to getting every detail right, and they do that by listening to you. I know it's a hard subject, but I also know we all see the sense and value of what Dignity Memorial does. Use the promo code Gary to get 25% off at Willow Glen Funeral Home. Reach out to my friend Tina Skurla today. She's committed to helping families not go through the tragedy of loss alone. Click on the link, use the promo code Gary, or email her at dmppa.tinaskurla.com, or call 408-398-7050.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, we're riffing here a little bit, so I don't know if we're a good band. We're just kind of be playing, just kind of riffing here. But I don't know that I would say bigger. I would say that I think it's one of those things that is the foundation to what intrinsically motivates and drives you. So the question of and Simon Sinek made a career out of the why, and we kind of preach down that same lane relative to what you're talking about, Gary, about the importance of it. But when you say, well, how do you get it? What I love is like we start people in a way, and we do this at the university and in businesses. We start with values, and whether those are known as your values, beliefs, and personal characteristics, like those values are intrinsically what motivates you. And yeah, they might shift from time to time, but an evaluation, if I gave you a list, and this is what we do, a list of almost 50 values, and I only gave you 3 minutes, and I said, circle 10, narrow it to 5, narrow it to 3, pick your number 1. And I'm not going to give you time because I don't want you to process. I just want to see, boom, what pops up. And if family is important, I'll give you family. So that way you don't feel like, I got to say family. Everybody's going to think that I don't care about my family. Like, I'll give you that one. And if you don't care about your family, that's a different problem. But so I was like, but I'll give you that one. But give me 4 or 5 other ones.
Yeah.
Then here's the magic. So just think like we're building a little house here on the why. So once we know the values, here's what I want to know. I want to know the story underneath the value. The reason you asked me about Mr. Richardson was because he was somebody that impacted my story underneath the value of all sorts of things: love, family, perseverance, adventure, all the stuff that comes with music. There's all kinds of stuff there. that kind of link back to a core value set. If I would have told you my mom or my dad, I would have given you different words. But then so they go from the values to what's the story under the values? Can you imagine the world if you walked into an organization and you just said, hey, here's what we're going to do. Before we do anything else, we're going to sit down for 1 hour. And what people, this is what I always love, Gary, relative to the why. They're always like, man, Dan, we don't have time to do that. And I'm like, okay, all right, pause, time out. You're going to be working with people 250 to 260 days a year, over 2,000 hours. And you're going to tell me when it comes to forming relationships with your teams, you don't have 1 hour to sit down. I'll give you a list of values, but understand the values, the words, but then the story. And then you move them from the story to the impact people. And where I was trained, we broke it into like 3 or 4 life stages. So where I was trained under Dr. Boyatzis, we broke it into 0 to 18, like 19 to 24, 25 to 40-ish. And then if you wanted to go to a later category, 40 plus, right around when you hit the midlife crisis, like that whole thing, that's a whole nother game. But just there alone, who are the people now that have impacted your journey? So now what you're doing is you're building a narrative, and you don't need freaking AI for this. You can actually do this on your own. Go values, story behind the values, the people that have impacted your journey. To your point earlier, there could be 2, 3, 4, 10. I don't care. Just the people that impacted. But then what are the characteristics of those people that of all the people on the planet made you think of them? Then you craft that into a narrative. And then from the narrative, you say, now, if you had took all those words and we'll use a Simon Sinek trick here. And he used to talk about the word to. So for me, it's to coach with purpose and impact so that, and somebody says, well, what's the so that mean? It's in service of what? For me, it's so that higher quality relationships are built, because it goes back to the way I was trained in my doctoral program is if there's no problem or practice to solve, and we think we're so great at building relationships, then don't worry about the why. And then when you back it all away, and David Goggins, if you ever had him on your podcast, you can't hurt me guy,
It's a little too intense for me. I'm afraid of what he may say.
Yeah, he's got a little sharper tongue than you and I. But what he'll say oftentimes is like, well, he's like, motivation is crap. And I always process that for a second. I'm like, But I wouldn't say motivation is crap. What I would say, though, is that when you understand the intrinsic motivators that make me uniquely who I am, or Gary uniquely who you are, magic starts to happen. Because what happens is you trigger the right network of the brain. People are more open to new ideas. They're more creative. They know you care. And then here's the catch. The catch is, and the reason the why is so foundational in relationships. Like, would you build a house without having a strong foundation? That'd be ridiculous. But the reality is the reason it's so important is that in the coaching discipline, which is my field of expertise, is that it actually allows you to be more transactional when you need to, not less, because the relational piece comes first. And then if it's like, if you got something to say to me, this is the truth part, you're going to look at me and go, you might say to me, hey, Dan, I love you. I really do. Coach John Wooden back in the day, 10 national championships, 88 game winning streak. He knew a lot of stuff before there was a lot of some of this information, but it's like, I don't have to like you, but I do have to love you. And so you say, hey, I love you, but you need to know this piece of information, and I'm going to give it to you. And it's coming from a place. Now you talked about empathy. It comes from a place of not only empathy, but even probably more importantly, compassion. That's why I think the why is so foundational. And you can take people through. None of that's rocket science. It's like, just understand the values that make someone intrinsically who they are, and then let them reevaluate those every couple of years. Do that with your kids now. And then watch their journey when you move into that part of the daddy realm where you're the coach, because their readiness, you got to let them fly. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not coaching them the same way that you were back when they were 5 or 6, that they didn't have the information to make the decisions. But as they get older, it's no different to your point in parenting. You have to be able to change gears as they go and grow, and that's just key. That's a long answer to the why, but there you go.
It's a beautiful answer. And there was no clock. I love that. As I tell my wife, and I've had this discussion, from 0 to 5, I'm trying to raise a kid. From 5 on, I'm trying to raise an adult. That I'm trying to give them all the tools they need so they don't have to come back to me all the time for just the stuff. When I left home when I was 18, and my mother, I was the youngest five. And my mom said, well, you could stay here and go to junior college. And my response to her was, you've raised 5 kids.
Hmm.
You've taught me everything I need to know. And I can't wait to get out there and put all this into practice. That you've done your job. And I was so looking forward to leaving. And I tell my wife this all the time. I want them to want to leave, not because they hate us. It's because we've taught them that life is fun. We overuse and underuse the word joy. When you talked about David Goggins,
yeah,
I feel sorry for him because he's tried to eliminate any part of joy from his life, right? And in some wild thing, it's like almost eliminating joy is his joy, and he's too obtuse, for lack of a better word, to even realize it. Because the thought of anything bringing him joy would bring him no joy. I try to approach life with my children. Life's hard enough. There's a lot of things that are going to be tough. But if I can approach it and try to find joy, and more importantly, if I can try to help you find joy, now we're on to something. Now we're building something together. And now we'll start looking to meet each other's needs. And when I was doing this stuff, and I was researching you, and I was listening to the podcast you did with Jeff, and they're brilliant. I literally just sent it to a buddy of mine, the podcast that you guys released, the latest one. He runs a company. He runs a national branch of a global product. And he was telling me that he has this one guy who's really good at doing what he does, but he's kind of oblivious to everything else. And he's trying to find a way to get this guy to go, okay, you've flipped that widget. Now take a look at all the other widgets. And where could it lead? And I said, dude, I am literally going to send you this, and I'm going to tell Dr. Docherty about this. I said, because they literally talk about how you handle these situations. And I said, there's the 6 P's and the whole thing. I said, but it's fascinating because everybody's going to have problems. Your kids aren't going to do what you want them to do. Your spouse is not going to react as excitedly as you are to something, or you're not going to that way. But trying to help resolve the conflict, as we said. And I don't like conflict. I hate conflict.
me too.
I love the way you guys approached it and how you approach it. And I can't wait. I'm gonna angle to get a copy of this book because I want to read how you deal. As we said earlier, there's theory and there's practice. A large part of education is theory, right? But wisdom is knowledge plus experience. One without the other is worthless. How did you approach those things in a thumbnail thing? And I guess I ask you these questions, and then you feel like you need an answer in 60 seconds, and you don't. Take your time.
Yeah, I'll just say this. First of all, one of the other things that I've learned along the journey is that a lot of people, like when you say the 6 P's, nobody's going to read one of those words and be like, well, I have no idea the meaning of that word. That's not going to be what happens. What I want people to understand is that when you can move from, some people just have natural superpowers intuitively when it comes to leading others and communication and things. And then there's others, maybe like your friend's colleague, that it doesn't come as intuitively to them, but you can develop certain skills to maybe move it into a little bit more of intentionality when you communicate. And so, what Jeff and I really kind of focused to do is we of course looked at a lot of data, but more importantly than that is we looked at what's been our 30 plus years, each of us practically in leading people. And the 6 P's kind of came out of the fact that once you set that foundation, we were just talking about that shared vision piece through values and people's stories, all that piece. And then you kind of lean into the fact that we've got to be aligned on the mission of where we're going. There is an accountability execution piece that great leaders, great companies know. Like, we've got to have that. But once we have that foundation, the 6 P's were really born out of the fact that, if you think about them real quick, is if you and I get on this call and we're very clear on the purpose of this conversation, and even if you said, well, Dan, it's not scripted, I'm not going to send you 10 questions that you have to prepare. I want it to be authentic. Well, you're clearly defining the purpose so we can optimize our time. And then if you think about it from my perspective, as well as your own perspective, that's going to build a stronger relationship. That's the third or the second P there. And then you say, okay, well, what's going to be our plan to navigate this conversation? And then you, as a host, because you do this over and over and over again with repetition, practicality is you're going to know based on how I'm responding of whether I'm kind of on the path, even if it wasn't the intended path, through repetition, your ability to kind of steer it back and work through the conversation in a way that's authentic. But, some people naturally come on and they can communicate and talk and it's very natural. And then others, it's harder. But you're navigating that plan and path together. And the reason they're together is if you don't have a plan, how in the world do you know you're on or off the path? And like as simple as that sounds, it's like put the two together. Because then the fourth P, we can measure it. Because in progress, we can measure it. And then in leadership, it's so refreshing when people come back and say, hey, Gary, here's kind of, I've been working the plan. Here's kind of where I am. I love it. And what I found in the thousands of scenarios we've coached is that like the plan is so weak for most people. And they're like, oh, well, we didn't really write that down, but we have it. I'm like, you do really? Because can I see it? And they're like, no, we got it. And I'm like, can I see it? And then they're like, oh, well, we don't really have one, but it's understood. I'm like, okay, great. No, it's not. So let's dig in there, go back to shared vision. And then when we're measuring that, then to your point, that fifth P is problems. Like be in the business of removing barriers to problems. And then the sixth one is performance, because performance does not necessarily mean it's the goal. That's another big aha for us. It's not about necessarily the goals and outcome. It's about if we did everything right and we performed at a really high level, am I going to be the best guest you've ever had on here? It's not even my goal. I don't care. I want other people to flourish in whatever it is that they flourish in. I just want to make sure that hopefully this time is useful to people. That's performance to me, for this particular hour that we have together. And as simple as those 6 P's sound, I knew that we could help navigate people with conversations that have more impact. So, did you ever see the Netflix documentary on NFL quarterbacks?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you remember
Mahomes and Kirk Cousins?
Exactly. So do you remember in that documentary thing that blew me away about, and this is what I always love with people about coaching. We'll go to, and I'm not a Chiefs fan. I grew up in Cleveland, feel sorry for me. And now I live in Cincinnati. We do have some good talent there, but watching Patrick Mahomes.
As long as you outscore everybody 201-0.
What's that?
Well, as long as you outscore everybody 221-220.
Okay,
you got no defense. You got a lot of odd offense.
That's a different podcast, but we might have to come back to that one in, addition to.
I'm a Saints fan, dude. I've got my Super Bowl and I'm good.
You had your Drew Brees, man. You had your Brees moment.
Yeah, I don't ever need anything else in my entire life.
But think about Drew Brees, think about Patrick Mahomes. Again, what struck me in that documentary, just watching it, not as a leadership person, but just watching it. People that I'll train will be like, well, yeah, those 6 P's that's not that hard. I'm like, it's not meant to be hard. It's meant to give you an intentional approach to handling a conversation. And they're like, well, Dan, life doesn't work that way. They don't go in that order. I'm like, well, let's go back to Patrick Mahomes for a second. When he and Andy Reid are drawing up the playbook back in the summer, they have a whole series of plays. And he knows those plays so well that in that room, he's not outsmarting. Well, you know what? I think that wide receiver ought to go that way. And no, sorry, coach, don't let him go run across the middle. We want him to go out that way. It's the play. Now, but when they get into the real world, what Patrick is brilliant at is he gets under center. He looks across the defense and he sees things that they didn't see either in practice. And what does he do? That play's called into his headset. He knows so well where everybody is going that now he leans into the flexibility to be like, okay, I'm going to call an audible. And I always tell people, whether it's neurocoaching or some other coaching framework, use whatever adds fuel to your rocket ship of coaching. Is that, and if you don't have anything, then maybe you should get a rocket ship or a race car. But the reality is that know it so well that it becomes like that. You're not thinking. And when you get that repetition, which is what the great athletes do, the great performers, the great business people, when they get that repetition, then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, wait a second. This isn't going like I thought Gary and our conversation would go. So I might move from that 2nd P to the 6th one. I'm not articulating that verbally, but I'm maneuvering it in my head. And that is like for the rest of my life when I'm on this planet, I don't know what else I'm going to do, but if I can help people have that kind of impact where they have better conversations, then I know that that work matters, and there's other amazing people out there that do similar stuff to what we do. And I love it when somebody says, yeah, but so-and-so says what you say. I'm like, good. You know what? Go to church next Sunday. You're going to see the same stories, not only this year, but next year and the next year and for 80 years. The difference is our context changes. So you receive the information from a different perspective because your life moves. And here's the last thing I'll say. Nobody needs us. One of my professors, one of my colleagues taught me this. They're like, students actually don't need us for information. They can go out and get information faster than any time in human history. What they need us for is context and application. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. The smartest people don't have the best frameworks. The smartest people actually help people put that into action. And that's, in our little corner of the world, since Jeff and I, that's what we try to do, every day. And if we can do that, then we'll think it'll help people personally and professionally.
Interpretation is helpful, right? I mean, there's only so way to write a murder mystery. There is, right?
Yeah.
What separates John D. McDonald from Elmore Leonard, from Agatha Christie, from all of that? It's how they interpret the information and give it to us. You say going to church. So many pastors I have found, open up my eyes. I'm literally 2 years ago, Christmas time, and I had never thought about this. This is what I love about it. Pastor goes, so they had to go to Bethlehem to give birth, and they had to stay in a stable. Do you know why they had to go to Bethlehem? Because that's where Joseph was from. All of his family was there, and nobody took him in. And you may have heard that sermon 30, 40 years ago. I've went through my entire life and never heard that interpretation.
Yeah.
Where I went, my brain just went, because I had never thought of it.
And don't you think, Gary, real quick, that interpretation of that story on that day, now transfer that over to you. You hear a different maybe interpretation of that, and then your application of that relative to the season of life that you're in, your interpretation now it changes, which is what I love about coaching. I've had people, Gary, literally that we've trained, and they've come up to me afterwards and like, Dan, I don't think I want to coach. I'm really good as an individual contributor. I want to be the actor. I don't want to be the director. And I'm like, well, then go be the actor. Do what you do best. Why? And you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what I love in the psychology world is that there's such a difference between, like, think about our kids, what your the ideal self, which is who they want to be. The real self is who they are. But then the ought self, where people get so trapped, is I think I ought to be this because dad was this, or mom was this, or my counselor says I should be this. And they get wedged inside that ought self. And I'm like, now when you go back to the why, is the why so important? Because when you lean back into what do you want to be? And I'm not talking about a job, but like, what impact do you really want to make? I'm telling you, man, I never thought I could do those kind of exercises with 19-year-olds because I'm like, well, they got to have wisdom and they got to have, I'm telling you, man, it's amazing to me when I do all these hundreds and hundreds of, kind of wide journeys with students, and I call them the journey. It's like they're on just a certain part of their journey at that point, but they'll say a word and I'm looking at it through the lens of, now being 56, I'm looking at it through a 56-year-old lens and they're looking at it through a 19-year-old lens. We might say the same word, but it doesn't mean the same thing. And then if I'm curious enough, thank you, Ted Lasso, right? But if I'm curious enough, I'm going to be able to step back and say, Gary, what does that word mean to you? And how can I, as your coach, help you get to where you want to go? But guess what? If you put that out there and you espouse that, and you don't, what you said at the very beginning, you don't do the work, guess who's going to kick you in the can? This guy.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't like you. It's not that I don't love you, but you deserve it. And man, that'd be like, because we get afraid, like, oh, I don't want to upset anybody. It's like, where's your foundation? You'll weather the storm. It will weather the storm, because they're coming. There's not a person on this planet that the storm's not coming. I don't care if you're Kenny Chesney or Donald Trump or whoever, your storm is coming, man. And so it's like, but when you can't weather it, then, and Jeff and I try to teach a lot, we don't put ourselves out there as a kind of a stained glass company, but Jeff will be the first one to tell you that we do have stained glass principles, but through plain glass windows. And I'm like, yeah, there's a little bit of authentic magic in that.
It's true. And as you say, the storms, everybody, think about some of the best lessons you ever learned in your life were at your lowest points. I play golf. I've told my sons this before. I have never learned anything on the days I'm magically playing amazingly. Never. Yeah. Right? The only thing I've learned after playing it for a long time is that, well, I've got a really bad round coming. Don't know when it's coming, but it's coming, and I won't be able to fix it.
Yeah.
But some of my best days are those days, the days I have the most fun is when it's not, and I'm able to figure out a way to not to hit the ball great, but just to make it go in the general direction of what I hope, because my goals have become a lot more attainable. Instead of I need to hit it 3 feet from the pin. No, I need to not hit it in that lake 60 yards that way. And then we redefine success, and then we redefine again, searching for that joy. I encourage my kids. I try to find that joy. My faith, I try to find my joy. It's sometimes hard when you read the Old Testament. You have to remind yourself, this is God, right? This ain't you and me. This is God. And he's giving us the rules to find the joy, that do this, and then everything changed, and then the other stuff. And we can go down the theological bent, but we don't have time. But I just love how even in something as old as a document as that, is that when you sit back and go, here's your values. This is what matters. What matters to you? Because what you value is what you'll do something about. And it's really hard for us to go, what is our values? If I ask my son right now, my 13-year-old, what's your value? You and I both know. You ask me what my values are 5 years from now, pretty good chance they're the same. 13, 5 years from now, almost zero chance they're the same, right? So that journey that you talk about and having to reassess all the time, I find it fascinating. And that's why I've loved this hour. And I knew, you've said some kind things about me, but my whole thing is I try to know about you, but I don't know you. And I want to walk away from each one of these knowing you better. Because if you ask me, I had to do this one time. What's your mission statement? And my whole thing is everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And sharing that story is what bonds us together as humans. And getting to hear that. If you paid attention, all I do is tell stories. I'm telling one right now. All I do is tell stories. And the reason I love Jeff, and the reason when I love the stories. And that's why we started off with a story, because I'm like, he's mentioned that music teacher so many times, but he hasn't told me the story. So I'm going to find out that story. And to Mr. Richardson, God bless you, sir. Well done. The fact that the good Lord gave you a chance to see just how important you are. Good job.
Yeah.
So, Dan, this has been a delight. And I knew it was going to be a delight. We have the websites, everything out there. And I encourage you, the Driving Change podcast with Jeff, go look up the episode if you really want to get in the nuts and bolts of it, because Dan was trying to teach a monkey how to use a screwdriver right here. So he wasn't getting really down into the nuts and bolts. He was giving me the 30,000 foot view. But if you want to hear a little bit more and get down to the 4-foot view, it's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I want you to know I really appreciate it. I think what you're doing and your work matters. And I hope if nobody's told you today that your work matters, I hope you know it does.
I appreciate that. And the good Lord lets me know all the time. I always like to tell everybody, I told Jeff this before. I'm the most blessed man you know, and I'm so far ahead, I don't know who's in second place.
That's great.
Dr. Dan Docherty, thank you.
Thank you.